So one scan, again, I don't really care if it's a photo or objects or leaves or anything you want to pick up, but I just want to make sure you know how to use a scanner. So you can use a scanner at home. If you want to use a scanner in here, there's one in 203. We can use that. You just need to bring something. A word of text, again, this can be super minimal component, like you barely see it, to it's a whole poem. I don't care which route you take, as long as there's some sort of text, that's good. 4 lines, we'll talk about how to make those, but straight, dotted, borders, just plain old lines, there's lots of ways you can interpret that. 2 shapes, and by shapes I'm meaning ones that you already use the shape tool, we'll look at that. Gradients, I'll review that. Clipping mask is super fun. Couldn't quite see that because the computer wasn't working last time. 2 or more different levels of opacity, and we'll look at that. 2 or more different blending modes, those are the ones where you can do overlay and multiply. And then layer styles, some of you guys I showed the drop shadows or borders on things. There's lots of other ones too, some of them are just silly and some of them are really nice. And then whatever other things you want to add. And then I also mentioned that if all this stuff that I'm asking is starting to uglify your piece, like you're just like, oh, it's getting hard to look at, just remember you can still keep the pretty version, just turn the version that's ugly into me with all the stuff. I just want to make sure that you have everything. And for this one, I do want your PSD, not for critique, but for the grade, because I am going to be monitoring how you're labeling things, because it's really important you guys develop some good habits now of labeling and organizing your stuff. So we're going to use layers, groups, and then in the end you'll just turn in a JPEG for this one for critique, and for the grade you're going to turn in your Photoshop file, a JPEG of full resolution. That means, you know, the highest that you've made your file at. I'm asking for it to be 200 at 8x10 at minimum, just because 8x10 is a pretty standard photo size to print out if you felt like it, but you guys can go bigger if you want to. If you want to make a big poster, do it. Go ahead. And then just for practice again, we'll do one more for the web. But that's, all right, I will fight with him as long as I can. My voice is cracking this morning, so we'll see. So just as far as some file stuff, I just had to do a revision on this because I got for a client. I think we're going to have to shut that. Thank you. That's better. So for this one, there's a lot of elements, and before I had many more elements, but this is now the final version, so I just chucked everything that I didn't need for this one anymore. So you can see I just simply labeled some stuff, just so, I mean, for the most part for icons, like these are pretty obvious, but if I had tiny little lines, I wouldn't be able to see the icons. So the profiles I can see, sun, obviously, I'm just choosing simple, really simple words. The bike, you know, it's nothing too surprising, but that one is hard to see as an icon too. Broken glass, the text. Now this text has a little bit of a stroke on it, so if you see an FX, it just stands for FX on here. That's that layer style. You can see I can barely have one on there, but it just separates it away from that border just a little bit, because the blue and the green are too similar in value, so when I have it off it doesn't look quite right. So anyway, all of these things are layered and labeled. And you can also put groups inside of groups. I could technically put, it's going to mess up my order so I won't keep it like this, but I can put a group in a group in a group in a group. You can just nest like crazy if it makes sense for your design, but sometimes it won't just because of how things are layered. So in the end, hopefully yours will look something like that, where you've got your labels on things and your groups labeled as well. So I'm going to go ahead and just start adding things to this photo. Just as a reference point, you guys have seen this one before. I modified it quite a bit. So the first thing is, okay, this one could have been a scan, I guess. The one word of text. Now, again, you don't have to do anything fancy with the text. Just click on the text tool. You guys can choose your font choices, sizes. If you're not sure what they are, just go ahead and start typing. You can change it later. You can also go to Window and bring up your character button right away. And this window over here, it's basically all the basic stuff that you could do with fonts. So you can keep that up. So if you go ahead and just remember, I had mentioned that there's 2 ways to make text. If you're just going to do like 2 words, let's see, will it let me? It's so tiny I can't see it. So I can double click it just to make sure I'm actually selected on it. I need to up that size like crazy. Even that's not big enough. If it's not big enough, just go up to the T area, either there or here. Doesn't really matter if you've got that button, that window up. You can do it there. It's a little big. Okay, so there's some text. Once, if I see it and I'm like, no, that color's not working, you just double click on the T icon, and you can, again, if you've got your character window open, you can just click here. You can also click into the image itself, and you can choose colors directly from your photo or whatever other thing you have, which is really nice. You can make things meld, especially if you're wanting more of a subtle effect with your text. Now, if you have many lines of text or a paragraph, what you want to do instead is to click where you think you're going to begin and draw a box, and that will show you where the edges are. So if I just select this text and start pasting, you can see what's happening, right? It's ending at that edge. Sometimes you're going to want this. If you're writing or copying and pasting a paragraph into here, you definitely want it as a box. Otherwise, you'd have to go in and add and manually like click on someplace and add a return. You don't want to have to do that usually, because then if you want to make a change, you got to go back in and delete the stuff. So two important distinctions there between how to do it, and that will move over also as we work into Illustrator. So I'll get rid of this one now. We don't need to see that one. Now, if your text isn't showing up well enough, we can go into layer styles and figure out a way that it'll show up a little bit better. So layer styles are under layer, layer style, and then here's a bunch of basic ones. I don't particularly love that way to get to it, because a shortcut is to double click on the very edge of your layer, and it brings it all up here. And you can have multiple things. There's not just one. You can do multiples. Let's do like a drop shadow and a stroke on here. It's really make it horrible. There you go. And then for each item, if you want to change something, you got to click on the actual word, and then it brings up those possibilities for you. Now you can do it a little bit more subtle, and I could do it as white instead, just to make sure that it would lift off a little bit. And then for something like the drop shadow, you can change the color. Drop shadows don't have to be black like you normally think of them. They can be any color. You can do different angles. I'm going to make it darker just so we can actually see it. You can still can't see it, so I need to change. Yeah, there we go. Got to change the distance. Probably change the spread. Change the size a little bit. Woo, now it's ugly. And then you can change the opacity. You could change the opacity. Yeah, this is the best place to change the opacity here. So you can do extreme. You can do subtle. It's totally up to you. If you're just trying things out, it's nice because you can, again, you can click this little arrow up and down, and then if you choose not to use one of them, you just turn the eye off on that particular thing. And it's a pretty nice way to do it. And then when you're done with it, so it doesn't take up so much room, especially if you're on a laptop, you probably want to shrink that. Just make that shorter. Then let's go back to the list, make sure I'm kind of doing this in order. Oh, lines. That one's just super simple. So we went through quite a few of these different aspects, but we didn't really do much with shapes. So there is a line tool. The automatic one is a rectangle. It's the top one. And if you go to the line tool, you can choose what color you'd like it to be. And there are some basic kinds of lines here. The first one is usually just plain old line. I'll choose this one. You can also look, let's see how many more options they have. For this one, you can change how often the gaps are between the lines. Let's do like 8 if you want really, really tiny ones, things like that. And then you just draw. Oh, that one made a straight line. Let's check at the other one. It really doesn't like it. Okay. Let me make change to this one. Okay, so that's the stroke. It's being stubborn. Okay. might need, well, I think that one did it. Yeah, there we go. So that time you can kind of see the dashes in there. It's pretty subtle. And they can be subtle, by the way. So that one is filled with green. There's like a little bit of dash of a green in there and then outlined with blue. But there's a few different ways you can deal with that. I'm going to go ahead and delete them though. Don't need to see them right now. And then the other thing you could do, honestly, I'm pretty open to whatever you guys are feeling like. So if you just want to use a brush as a line and just make your own line work, that's fine. You'll have to make a new layer if you're going to want to use the brush. You don't want to do it on your original layer because you might not like it. So in your layers, just make sure, I can't quite get to it on the side here. I need to rearrange my space and make this, well, hopefully that helps. So I'm just going to make a new layer. You can also hit the icon at the bottom here. That little looks like a page turned. That one will also give you the same options. So you could make a line with just the brush tool. That's fine with me. Remember, underneath the brush tool there are lots of different variations. These are the normal ones, but if you want more, there's a lot of variations. You might want to do calligraphic. You might want to do square brush, which, you know, there's just different kinds. Wet media, so it looks more like painter brushes. There's all sorts, you know, so you can give some texture things too. So play around with those. You could make, now if you draw text, technically that's line and I would accept that, but I still want you to use the text tool, okay? Just to make sure you know how. So again, I'm super open about the line stuff. I just want to see some lines happening. Then shapes. Okay, so you guys saw you can get line from the shape tool, but there's also all these other ones. I'm not going to be too picky about these, but for the rectangle one, if you guys hold your shift key down, you will get a perfect square. And this dialog box comes up for the properties, and so if you want an actual border on there without using a layer style, you can punch one in here. And then you can see, like, because I happen to have that on the line tool, I happen to have chosen the dash. That's why it's making the dash line on there. But this is also could be an instance of a line. If you use a stroke like that and it looks like a border, technically is a line. So you can use many, many types. So basic square, rectangle, I don't think that's anything too complicated. For the rounded rectangle, you will need to determine the round edge. So for this one, if I put like 5, yeah, that's fine. They can all be 5. As you can see, it barely adds a border, or it barely adds a edge. The bigger the number for the properties, the more round it will get. I'll try 30. So that one is definitely more round than the other one. Now, Ellipse Tool, if you hold the shift key down, you get a perfect circle. Polygon, if you click once, if you click once on any of them, you do get options. I should just show you that. So if you know you want, like, I want a 4x4, okay, well then just say 4in by 4in, or if you want to think in pixels, you can do that too, and it'll simply do exactly what you say. But some of these you really do need it. So for example, for the Polygon tool, if I want, you know, like 6 sides, I'm going to need to specify that. And you can make a star out of that one. Custom shape tool is a little bit funnier. There's some really odd ones up here, but they're almost like bad clip art, almost. If you go up to this icon here, remember that gear usually means more. So, you know, let's say if you were doing a comic or you know, something that you wanted to do the bubbles, well, that's fine. Then when you come out here, if you want to hold the shift key down, you can. Otherwise, you can elongate or flatten out some of those shapes as well. And again, they're going to follow the same rules as whatever those shapes were. If you want to change the shape, see how do you guys remember that icon that happened sometimes on photos and you don't want it if you're wanting to edit? These, though, mean that these shapes are editable, which you do usually want to keep for a while. So for that one, if I'm like, yeah, I need to change that color, well then I just have to double click on that icon and it's a quick change of a color. It's not the same way as going in with a shape that you've made differently. So those are basic shapes. One or more gradients, I'll review that one. So remember that the gradient is underneath the paint bucket tool, or it depends on what you've used last. It might pop up for you, but because I had used that other one, it came up. And then up here are some of those basic defaults for gradients, and some of them are truly horrific. Remember, you can start off with something that's kind of what you want and then modify the color. Let's say if I wanted to go from like red instead, but go to transparent. As long as that tiny little grid is up, that you know that that means transparent. So I'll go ahead and do, well, I'll keep it as is. And then on a new layer, you can do your gradient. So the gradients can go from top to bottom, side to side. You can be a diagonal. If you hold the shift key down at the same time as when you're clicking, it'll make a more perfect line. So you don't, if you want it straight, you don't accidentally like tilt it a little bit. It'll automatically straighten it out for you. I think I'm going to go the other way on this one. And the farther up I reach, it changes the gradient just slightly. So if I go from here to here only, you know, that gradient, it's set to a diamond. So it's just doing a small diamond at the bottom. I'm going to change it to just linear so it's a little bit easier. So now when I make it, it should, there we go. That's a little bit more standard. But again, you've got many, many choices under there. So feel free to mess around with the gradients. They can be all over. They can be in very small areas. We'll take a look now at how to do that. So clipping masks are definitely fun to use. I'll show you a couple versions of this. Now, Illustrator also does clipping masks. InDesign does them almost automatically. The annoying thing is that Illustrator and Photoshop do them backwards from each other. So I was have to remember which one is which. So it might take me a second. So I'm going to duplicate the gradient layer so I can or this photo layer so I can manipulate it. I'm going to change its scale, and you'll see why in a second. And then I want to put it inside of that little square. So if I remember right, it's one or the other. I got to click on the, so I have a box underneath or a shape. It can be any shape. It could be text even. And then you take your object, it could be the gradient even, it could be the photo, whichever. And if you do a right click, or it's probably under layer, let's see. Yeah, create clipping mask, it's here too. And it pushes it inside whatever shape you have underneath it. So it's pretty fun. And remember, shape is a pretty loose term. It could be text. And that it can just be regular, you know, text that you're still able to edit. So it's kind of a fun thing. You can really put a lot of photos in one area, or you could take a photo and just manipulate certain sections of it. And maybe this spot's a little bit more this spot's a little bit more that. It's pretty subtle, but it can be a lot of fun. Then, so clipping mask. This definitely, I can tell you, is going to be on the midterm. So make sure you pay attention when you're making it. It's also, the clipping mask is also in Illustrator because both are important to know how to do that in both programs. Oops, wrong one.
Did you do it in a shape like a star?
Absolutely, yes. It doesn't care what kind. Yep, so you could have, actually I'll go through a couple versions for you just to help it make sense.
And that's in layers?
So I'm going to duplicate that photo layer again. This time I'll make it an even different shape just so we can see it. And I'll put it inside. Now sometimes this can be a little bit tricky. I'm going to move that shape down and make it a little bit bigger so we can see it. I have it on auto select. Unclick that. Oh, for Pete's sake. The only problem with groups is that if whatever's in the group, the whole thing moves. It's very annoying. Sometimes I don't group things until I'm absolutely ready. So then what I would need to do is I need to move my photo above my shape, whatever that shape is. And if you're not sure, you know, you can do that. Sometimes you can also change the fill on it just so you can make sure, yep, it's fitting or it's good. Then again, you go to layer and say create clipping mask, and it puts it in the shape. Now if I undo this, you guys see it went into all three parts of that layer. So if you have a shape that's multiple parts, it will still work. It doesn't work as nicely in Illustrator, I'll tell you that up front. But for this stuff it does work. Now even if I'm going to do a new layer here with just a crazy brush, just so you can kind of see how this works. I'm going to make it big. Woo! Yeah, this is going to be terrible. Bear with me. I'll just do this one again. Now you can always tell what item, and I was trying to push it in there too, but I need to push this one above here. You can always tell when something is being used as part of a clipping mask, because that little arrow is like, hey, I'm inside that one. It's just a really clear indication on your stuff. Now the other way to do the clipping mask, instead of going up to layer, you can also right click and get create clipping mask. So you can see here that's pretty awesome that it'll go into anything. So, you know, it could be that maybe that's text, for example. I shouldn't be enlarging this, but you get the idea. And then I could also maybe add an adjustment layer to that one so it's darker, and then when I turn on my, you know, if I had left the image the same size, I could really manipulate and call something out, even with just its own photograph. You just highlight a specific portion. So these can be used drastically, they can be used subtly, but either way they're quite fun to use. Different levels of opacity. This one's a pretty easy one. You'll use probably even more than I'm asking you to. So let's say we have it here, but maybe that gradient is just a little too intense. So I could go to opacity and just knock it down a little bit. That's an opacity change. So all I do is I click through your layers and I just see which ones. I'm just looking for two. Blending modes, I mentioned that a little bit, but let's go through that again. This is where some really fun stuff can happen as well. So I think you guys remember what I did with the gradient. Do you guys remember I had like a really ugly rainbow diamond thing, and then I overlaid it and it helped a little bit? Well, I could still leave the opacity lower, and over here on blending modes I can change how it reacts to the thing underneath it. So I could multiply it, and it kind of just like pushed red into the whole photograph. It's not sitting in the same exact way. If I change it to color burn, it's gonna, yeah, these ones aren't gonna react too much to that red. There we go. I'm gonna bump this up so you can really see. So in this one, it kind of, something bad happened in that water. But you'll find some surprising things and sometimes some really nice things that can happen with all of these. Like that's kind of nice. It took that dark and embedded the red into it. So there's definitely room for some beautiful things to happen. Even just with a normal pseudo ugly gradient, you can actually do some really subtle effects with it. So definitely try a couple different levels of blending modes, and you can do them, you know, some of them are going to be subtle, and that's fine. Layer styles, I mentioned those already. That's the drop shadows and whatever. Let's just take a quick look at what the other ones are. So under layer style, bevel and emboss, that's a little bit cheesy, but you can try it. Inner shadow, inner glow. Satin just kind of adds a weird sheen to it. It doesn't do that much. Color overlay though, that can be kind of okay and fun to do. Again, I'll choose a red, and it just made a giant, where did it put it? It put a color overlay right on top of the red, so it just intensified it a little bit. I think I've got two more. Okay, yeah, and so that's it as far as the absolute necessities. What you can do is, I started off with a photo, but what you guys will probably want to start off with is to just do File, New. If you're not using an image as a background and you're not quite sure where you're at with sizes, remember 8 by 10 is the minimum, and that's pretty small. It could be vertical or horizontal, I don't really care. But the resolution is important. I do want that at least 200 because you'd be able to print this on your printers at home. Keep in mind though that if you're going to ever do professional printing, it needs to be at least 300. Art books with fancy photographs, 600 pixels per inch usually. It's pretty intense and high res. So when I say high res, it just means high resolution because I'm lazy. Background contents isn't that big of a deal, but you can change the starting color if you want to. You can easily change it after. RGB, we talked about this a little bit, and I'm going to pull out some sheets. When we switch over to vectors, it'll become more important, so we'll discuss it again. But basically, if you're going to use something for print only, you could make it CMYK, but almost everything we do now, you're going to see it mostly off of a screen and it's a little bit off of printing. So I would say that the safe place is RGB. And then just know that if you're going to switch it to CMYK for something you have to print, it might just get a little bit more dull. That's all that will happen to it, just a little bit more dull. Because remember that the screens can see far more millions of colors than a printed item can. There's just the method in which the color is shown. And that's really all you have to worry about. You can pre-title something if you want to. And so, but it's not saved yet. It's just titled it for you. So sometimes it's a little confusing. When you go to save, let's do a quick Command S. Oh, I did it already. Oh, I guess maybe it is saving it. I don't know where it's saving it. What else can I do on here? I feel like that's probably the majority of the things you need. Yeah. So the rest of the time I really would like you guys to just try out a bunch of things. Just edit. Just a quick review also for, let's say that you decide you want to do an analogous color scheme and these are just too intense. I'm going to knock some of these out of the way here. But for your actual photo then, remember you will have to modify its beginning color. Now this gets a little tricky when your layers get many like they are. Obviously adjustment layers are preferable because you guys know that those are editable, right? But if you've got something sitting on top of something, you also know that that's going to affect absolutely everything else. So sometimes you might have to manipulate your photo in another file and then create a JPEG and just bring it over as the edited version. So just know that that might need to happen. Because if I do an adjustment layer and I decide that I want all the colors to be, let's say like more green, so I hit colorize. That's a quick way if you guys are wanting to establish just a one color, hit colorize. Then that's fine, but if I bring the hue saturation up above for everything else, remember it's also going to affect everything. So sometimes that's easy, and that's maybe what you want to do. You're just like, nope, here's my monochromatic. I'm good. I just did my one adjustment layer and everything is green. You could technically do that. I wouldn't have a big problem with that as long as the values are where you want them to be. But otherwise, if you want to manipulate things and if you're going to say, well, I need blue now because I'm going to do an analogous, well, then you'd have to decide, okay, well, what part's green, what part's blue, and manipulate your adjustment layer as needed. If you, though, know for sure that you like the photo the way it is, you've edited it, you can merge these together. To do that, you select the one layer, you select the other one with the Shift key held down, and then you can actually say merge layers. And the edited version is gone. You can't edit this now. It's just a flat green version. Now, if you've always kept, your backup good copy, which you should, and you realize you didn't make it the right color, fine, you can switch it later. But you can also do a more harsh adjustment layer and simply be like, oh, well, I want it to be more of a yellow-green. Okay, well, this isn't an adjustment layer, but you can certainly make it a bit more yellow-green, right? So there's many ways to manipulate all these things. Now, for the lines, if you don't like the lines or you don't like the shapes, remember you can make them super subtle. You could make them like 20%, and I would barely be able to find them. But that's partly the reason of labeling your stuff. So in your things, you could just do like red gradient. For the groups, there's a couple ways. You can see right now I had put everything in a group. You can make a brand new group. It looks like the folder icon. And you could move some things from one group to another. So if I decide I want that one up top, I can do that. That one's up there now. Basically, the other way that I like to do it is after I've done some stuff, look, let's say these are all shapes, right? Hold the Shift key down and select them. I can go up to the bar up here for layers, and I can just say, hey, can you please make a new group from layers. So not just new group, but it'll condense all the ones that you've just selected and make it into a group, and you can name it right there, whatever you'd want to, but now they're all, you know, collected how they, yeah, it's a pretty easy way. So again, just make sure that your layers are listed. Now this one, when you guys use shapes, it names itself. Rounded rectangle 1. If that works for you, keep it. If you want something more specific, then use that. But like this one might be better if it was listed as, you know, at least as photo. Something like that. So those are the absolute minimum that you'd want for your composition. Remember that this can be super, like my grandma made a scrapbook, that kind of feel, or like very, very minimal graphic design. Anywhere in between there is totally fine. Either ends of the spectrum, absolutely fine. But it can be a bit more of a personal thing. So remember how I was saying, like, you could make this as a poster for your little niece, and everything is purple and pink and little pony. I don't care. As long as you've got everything grouped and named properly, it's a personal gift then. That's okay. As long as you don't sell it, because, you know, My Little Pony's registered and trademarked. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
When you do a clipping mask, can you, so like that square where the whole ocean is in it, can you move, like reorient the picture?
Yes, yes. Sorry, I was doing it and not explaining. Yes. So I gotta find this one. Yeah. So all you have to do is you make sure you're on that layer, and then make sure you're on this tool for the move tool, and then you can just push it around however you need to. It is pretty nice. So I mean, if it's a drastic move, you can actually just click and drag. Otherwise, you can nudge it with the arrow tools. As long as you're on that particular tool, you can do it. Yep. You could even, if you realize like, oh, it's too big, well, you could do the free transform or go up to edit and do, you know, any of those other ones, and switch its size, rotate it, you know, any of those kinds of things that you'd want to do. So it's still totally editable even though it's within a clipping mask. It doesn't really know. It has no idea. Good question. Anything else? So for today, for the rest of today, you guys can just work on these for most of Wednesday. Same thing. You're just going to work on these, and hopefully you can get most of them done before the weekend. You can make a couple variations if you aren't happy with them or want to add more. You could even do one that this is my nice one, and then go a little bit more intense and add that crazy stuff. That's okay too. For the written component, just keep in mind what you'll have to write about. State which color theory you used. Talk about your value in saturation. So if you have something where it's got a lot of light, it's got a lot of dark and everything in between, just say it's a pretty full contrast image. I've got a lot of different variations of value. If everything is desaturated, you can talk about that if you've got a mix. I just want you to kind of explain what you're doing. I just want to make sure it makes sense. And I mentioned this before, but how is color used? Expressively, it's just like, it's usually something that's not real to life. It's, you make up whatever you feel like. So if you decide that your grass is going to be red, okay, well, that's probably not the most real thing ever. So it's probably along the lines of expressive, unless you're doing a sci-fi landscape. But you're saying something more. It's probably a little bit sinister depending on the color. Or you just want everything to be super bright and happy, then that could be expressive. It could be symbolic. Every color has specific meaning attached to it. Every culture has their own meanings attached to it. So if you are from cultures other than, you know, probably generic, bland Creighton, you guys can explain explain that just a little bit. Why is, for example, weddings here, most of them are white. It's not the same in most other cultures. You better have color. Like, that's almost disrespectful to have white because it's so plain. And then for that 2D principles, I have that this one PDF that I had showed you guys last time. It's just really brief mentionings of the elements and principles of design. So since I'm making you add shapes and add lines, technically you're using them. So just talk about your focal point. How is it helping? Your focal point is going to be like the most obvious part, the first thing people probably gravitate towards when they're looking at your image. And sometimes if you've got a grouping of things, it might not be one thing. It might be 5 and they happen to be very closely layered or they're overlapping each other. And so your focal point can be many things together. But talk about where you want the person to be looking and then maybe discover on the second or third pass something else. And then there was, for those of you guys now, I'm gonna do this because some of you guys are going to be interested in coloring your images, and so this feels like a good time to do it. If you're not interested in digitally coloring, then you can ignore me. Oh, where did I put it? I thought I put it here. Oh man. Oh, okay. Yes, I did. I stuck it here. So this is one of my former students' images. It's just a quick little sketch she made that she scanned. And I want to show you guys some tricks about how to color. So if you wanted to digitally color a thing like this, first off, your lines do not have to be black. And I know that this is not normal, but that's okay. So I'm going to first copy and paste that image, and I'm just going to throw it into a new file. The reason is because I'm going to change its mode. Right now it's an RGB. I want to, in order to get to Duotone right here, which is going to be my goal, first I have to switch it to grayscale. So I'm not going to flatten. That's fine. That's fine. It's just color. It's getting rid of all color information, and then I can switch it to Duotone. And you can do this for anything, by the way. It could be a full photo, but can you see that it's switching out the colors? It's not just adding like a blue color to the black. It's simply switching black out for blue. And it'll always ask you to name this. And then you can just do select all, copy, and I'm actually going to go back to my original file and paste it in where I can see it a little bit better. If I'm going to go ahead and do it to a photo as well, just so you guys can see what that means, because it's not going to mean the same thing if you see just that drawing. So for this one again, I'm going to go to mode, switch it to grayscale, and then so obviously it created a black and white image. And then I can go to Duotone. You see what it does there? So if you want an image to be pure color, like no black at all, just the most dark that it can get is whatever color you chose here. It's a pretty intense way of working, but it can be a really beautiful thing too. This thing screams album cover to me. But again, you would copy that and paste it into your other file that is technically listed as a, just going to move this one above here. Or is it blue? Right now this one is RGB. You can see the file type right here. So you can do it to photos too, but sometimes it's just nice to not have black is all. Alright, so we've got an image here, and if I want to start coloring it, I mean there's many ways I can try to color it. I could try, depending on how it was made, to use the quick selection tool and to select some areas, and that might be okay, it might not. It kind of just depends on how the image was drawn. But let's go ahead and give it a shot. And I'm going to make a new layer here. And I'm going to use the paint bucket tool and just choose a color. I'm just going to be pretty random here. Oh, I'm on monotone. I put it in the wrong layer. Where's my RGB? Ah, okay. I'm in the wrong one. Can you guys see that over here? It says monotone. Because I was like, hey, I chose green and it's still doing blue. It's because I chose blue as the color. So I put it, I'm just going to close that out so I don't do that again. So over here, I mean, I could have switched it to RGB, but I'll just keep it over here. So now I can go ahead and reselect those spots. For now, I'll just do that one. And then again, use my paint bucket and just simply click in there, and then I've got my color done. Now, if I maybe did too much coloring, I can take my eraser tool and just kind of, whoops, wrong layer. Oh, I know I forgot a step. Forgot to make a new layer. It basically colored my layer. I don't want to do that. I always want to try to keep my color layers separate. So before I actually paint, I need to make sure that in my layers, I make a new layer. And this would be called like green. And then I can go ahead and use this tool and fill it. Okay, that's better. Now, if I want to see some of that line work underneath, I need to change its mode to multiply. And then it lets me see underneath it, right? Now, if I realize like, oh yeah, I need to erase some stuff. Okay, well then erase it. Do what you need to do. You can choose multiple areas off of your original photo with that quick mask tool if you happen to have the right lines to do it, or just use your paintbrush tool. I'll change the color. And simply, ooh, not that brush. That's going to cause some some interesting effects. And then you just, again, I got to make sure I'm on a new layer. And this is super rough, but you get the idea. You just fill it in. And then when I do that, again, if I want to see the line work underneath, I got to hit multiply. But what's nice about it is that in the end, after you get all your lines done, you can move this up above it and hit multiply. Not that one. I don't want that one. I just want blue. And then you overlay on top. And so it'll let you see through your lines. It's just a quick way to have a nice sketchy thing, but still be able to digitally color it. So if you guys want more information on that, just let me know. But I wanted to show you in case some of you guys draw and want to bring some of your drawings in and actually add color to them. There's a couple ways to do it. So again, if you wanted just line only, but you wanted like a blue composition mostly, well then just edit your colors of your drawing and they don't have to stay black.